There is one quiet, exhausting pattern that almost every empath carries for years before they finally name it out loud. They keep hoping for change in people who have shown in 1,000 small and large ways that change is not coming. Not because the empath is naive, not because they are weak, but because something deeper is at work, something wired into their very nervous system, something shaped by every relationship that taught them love means patience, understanding means endurance, and connection means carrying the weight for both sides. And this is where the real misunderstanding begins. Most people look at an empath who stays too long, explains too much, or keeps offering second, third, and 10th chances and assume it is simple kindness or low self-worth. The deeper truth is far more precise. The empath is not hoping because they cannot see the truth. They are hoping because they see the truth so clearly that they cannot stop believing the person could still choose to meet it. That single sentence changes everything. Because once you understand why the hope persists, you stop judging yourself for it and start seeing it for what it actually is. The last invisible chain an empath must break before they step into a completely different kind of freedom. Most people think empaths keep hoping because they are overly optimistic. The truth is, they keep hoping because their perception is too accurate to ignore the potential they see. They do not see the version of the person who shows up every day. They see the version that flickers in rare moments of vulnerability, in the late-night conversations, in the glimpses of the child the person once was. And because the empath's nervous system is built to register potential as loudly as it registers pain, that flicker feels like proof that change is possible. It is not denial, it is hyper-awareness. This is the part most people never reach in their understanding. The empath is not blind to the red flags. They are drowning in the data. They catalog every inconsistency, every broken promise, every time their effort was met with silence or deflection. They feel the emotional whiplash in their body long before their mind admits it. Yet still, the hope remains. Why? Because their wiring turns potential into a moral obligation. If they can see it, they believe they are responsible for helping it emerge. That belief is not arrogance. It is the natural consequence of a mind that experiences other people's possibilities as vividly as its own. And here is where the hidden cost begins to reveal itself. Every time the empath chooses hope over evidence, they are not just extending grace. They are quietly abandoning a piece of their own reality. They override their nervous system's accurate read in favor of the story that maybe this time it will be different. They tell themselves the person is stressed, healing, not ready, going through something. These stories are not lies. They are translations. The empath is translating the raw data of disappointment into language their compassionate heart can still tolerate. But tolerance, when stretched across years, does not remain neutral. It slowly becomes self-abandonment. Not in one dramatic moment, but in 10,000 small surrenders. Each time they swallow their truth to keep the peace. Each time they stay silent when every cell is screaming for distance. Each time they invest more energy explaining their needs than the other person ever invests in hearing them. These are not small choices. They are the slow accumulation that eventually forces the breaking point everyone else mistakes for sudden. This pattern is not unique to romantic relationships. It shows up with family members who have never truly seen them. It shows up with friends who take without ever giving back. It shows up at work with colleagues or bosses who drain them while calling it teamwork. The empath keeps hoping because their heart was trained early that love requires them to be the bridge, the translator, the healer, the one who never gives up. Walking away feels like failing at the very role they were taught defined their worth. And this is where psychology becomes profoundly interesting. The hope is not irrational. It is the last echo of the empath's original survival strategy. In childhood or early relationships, hoping for change was often the only power they had. If they could just be good enough, patient enough, understanding enough, maybe the chaos would stop. Maybe the criticism would soften. Maybe the love would finally arrive in the form they needed. That strategy worked just often enough to wire itself into their identity. It became the way they proved they were lovable. So when an adult empath keeps hoping, they are not repeating a mistake. They are repeating a childhood solution to an adult problem. The nervous system does not update its software automatically. It waits for enough undeniable evidence that the old strategy no longer protects them. Until that threshold is crossed, the hope remains, because to release it feels like releasing the last thread connecting them to the possibility of being truly seen. But here is the part that changes everything once you see it clearly. The hope is not keeping the relationship alive. It is keeping the empath emotionally chained to a version of the other person that exists only in their perception. And every day they pour energy into that version, they are starving the version of themselves that needs protection, boundaries, and reciprocal love. This is not a small realization. It is the turning point most empaths reach only after years of quiet exhaustion. And the moment it lands, something inside them begins to shift from maybe they will change to I no longer need them to. That single internal pivot is where the real power begins. Not because the empath has grown cold, because they have finally grown honest. There is another layer most people never reach, and it is the one that separates those who keep cycling through the same painful dynamics from those who finally break free. The layer is this: the empath's hope is not just about the other person. It is about the empath's own unfinished story. Deep down, many empaths carry a quiet belief that if they can finally get someone to change, it will retroactively heal the times they could not get the original people to change. It is an unconscious attempt to rewrite history through the present. They think, if I can make this person see me, understand me, value me, then the child who was never seen will finally feel safe. It is beautiful. It is also impossible. Because no adult relationship can heal the original wound if the empath is still using the relationship as the arena for that healing. The only person who can heal that wound is the adult empath standing in their own power today. Once that truth settles, the hope begins to lose its grip, not through force, through recognition. The empath starts to see that every ounce of energy spent hoping for change in someone else is an ounce not spent becoming the safe place they always needed. And that realization is not depressing. It is liberating. It returns their focus to the only place it ever truly belonged: themselves. The cost of prolonged hope is rarely discussed in its full weight because it is invisible from the outside. On the surface, the empath still shows up, still cares, still tries. Inside, something else is happening. Their nervous system is slowly moving into a state of chronic hypervigilance. They are scanning for micro shifts in tone, in energy, in behavior, constantly calculating whether today might be the day the change finally appears. That calculation is not conscious most of the time. It is background software running 24/7. And it is exhausting in a way that no amount of sleep or self-care can fully restore. Because the exhaustion is not physical, it is existential. It is the quiet depletion that comes from living in two realities at once: the reality of what is, and the reality of what could be if only the other person chose differently. Holding both realities simultaneously fractures the empath's peace long before they ever name the fracture. This is why so many empaths reach a point where they do not explode. They simply go quiet, not out of anger, out of clarity. The hope that once fueled endless effort finally burns down to its last ember. And in the ashes, the empath discovers something they had forgotten they were allowed to have: the freedom to stop carrying the emotional load for two. But before that freedom arrives, there is usually a long middle chapter most people never talk about. It is the chapter where the empath is still hoping, still trying, still explaining, but the joy has left the process. They are going through the motions of the old pattern because they do not yet have a new one. They feel the growing discomfort. They sense the imbalance. Yet the old wiring keeps whispering, just a little longer, just one more conversation, just one more chance. That middle chapter is where the real psychological work happens. It is where the empath begins to collect evidence not against the other person, but for themselves. They start noticing how their body feels after every interaction. They start tracking how much of their day is spent mentally rehearsing conversations that will never go the way they hope. They start seeing the pattern not as this person is complicated, but as this dynamic is consistent. And once the pattern becomes undeniable, something sacred begins to shift. The hope does not vanish overnight. It dissolves, layer by layer, like fog burning off in the morning sun. Each layer that dissolves returns a piece of the empath's energy, their attention, their sovereignty. This is not the end of their empathy. It is the maturation of it. The empath does not stop caring. They stop confusing caring with self-sacrifice. They stop mistaking hope for wisdom. They stop believing that their depth obligates them to keep offering it where it is not received. And here is where the transformation becomes visible to everyone else. The empath who once stayed too long begins to step back without announcement. The one who once over-explained begins to speak less and observe more. The one who once carried the emotional weight for both sides begins to place that weight back where it belongs. These changes do not look dramatic. They look like peace. And peace, to people who benefited from the old version, often feels like distance. But the empath is not becoming distant. They are becoming discerning. They are no longer available for dynamics that require them to abandon themselves in order to keep the connection alive. That is not rejection. That is self-respect, finally expressed as behavior instead of just as an idea. There is a final layer that only reveals itself after the hope has been released. It is the layer where the empath discovers that the very quality that once kept them hoping is the same quality that now keeps them free. Their capacity to see potential does not disappear. It simply stops being offered as a blank check to people who have no intention of cashing it responsibly. Instead, that capacity becomes a filter. They see the potential, they honor it, and they still choose themselves. This is the quiet revolution happening inside empaths who finally stop waiting for change in others. They do not announce it. They do not need witnesses. They simply begin living from a new internal law. I will no longer pour my depth into spaces that have already shown they cannot hold it. And in that new law, something extraordinary returns to them. Their time, their energy, their joy. Their ability to be fully present in relationships that actually match their level of reciprocity. The relationships that remain are fewer, but they are real. The connections that survive are not built on the empath's endless patience. They are built on mutual respect, mutual effort, and mutual presence. The people who once received the empath's hope without ever returning it will feel the shift. Some will call it coldness. Some will call it ego. Some will try to pull them back into the old pattern with guilt or nostalgia or sudden displays of the very change the empath once begged for. But the empath who has crossed this threshold no longer negotiates with those tactics. They see them for what they are, the final test of whether the old hope still has power. And it does not. Because the empath has finally understood the deepest truth of all, the only person they were ever truly responsible for changing was themselves. Not in the self-blaming way society sometimes teaches, but in the liberating way that says, I get to decide what I will tolerate, what I will invest in, and what I will protect. This decision does not make them less compassionate. It makes their compassion sustainable. It does not make them less loving. It makes their love honest. It does not close their heart. It simply stops leaving the door unlocked for anyone who has repeatedly proven they cannot be trusted with the key. And in that quiet, deliberate closing of the door, the empath does not lose connection. They gain something far more precious. They gain themselves, fully, finally, without apology and without the constant background noise of hoping someone else will become the version they always needed. The hope that once felt like love was never the problem. The hope that kept them chained to people who could not or would not change was the problem. Releasing that specific hope is not giving up. It is waking up. It is the moment the empath stops arguing with reality and starts aligning with it. And once that alignment happens, everything in their world begins to reorganize around a new center. Not the potential in others, but the reality of their own worth. Not the possibility of change in someone else, but the certainty of their own growth. Not the fear of being alone, but the peace of being whole. This is why empaths keep hoping for change in people who never will. Not because they cannot see clearly, because they see so clearly that they cannot stop believing the best is still possible. But the day they stop needing that belief to be true in order to feel safe is the day they step into the version of themselves they were always meant to become. Not louder, not colder, not less empathetic, simply more free. And that freedom does not announce itself with drama or declarations. It announces itself with the kind of deep, unshakable calm that only arrives when you have finally stopped abandoning yourself to keep someone else comfortable. In that calm, the empath does not just survive the pattern. They do not just heal from it. They transcend it completely. And they never return to the version of themselves that needed anyone else's change in order to feel whole. Because they finally understand the most liberating truth of all, the change they were always waiting for was never supposed to happen in the other person. It was always supposed to happen inside them. And once it does, everything else falls beautifully, peacefully, and permanently into place.